Between 1849 and 1854, Abraham Lincoln vanished from public life. He had served one term in Congress. He had failed to win the appointment he wanted. His political allies had moved on, and so Lincoln stepped back, not to rest, but to rebuild. What most people don't know is that this disappearance wasn't his first collapse. 8 years earlier, Lincoln had fallen so far into despair that his closest friends made a grim decision. They removed every razor from his room. They hid the knives. They watched him around the clock. This is the story of what broke Abraham Lincoln, and the 5 years he spent putting himself back together, piece by piece, in silence. In January 1841, Lincoln was 31 years old. He had just ended his engagement to Mary Todd under circumstances that tortured his conscience. His best friend, Joshua Speed, was preparing to leave Illinois permanently, and his political ambitions, the internal improvements projects he had championed, had collapsed into scandal and debt. The combination shattered him. Friends described him as delirious to the extent of not knowing what he was doing. One wrote that Lincoln was reduced and emaciated in appearance, and seems scarcely to possess strength enough to speak above a whisper. For weeks, he stopped attending the legislature. He could not work. He could barely speak. Joshua Speed later recalled it bluntly. Lincoln went crazy. We had to remove razors from his room, take away all knives and other such dangerous things. It was terrible. This was not a bad mood. This was a man standing at the edge of his own existence, looking down. During the worst of it, Speed confronted Lincoln directly. He told him that if he did not rally, he would certainly die. Lincoln's response would define the rest of his life. He said he was more than willing to die, but he could not yet, because he had, in his words, done nothing to make any human being remember that he had lived. He wanted to connect his name with something, anything, that would redound to the interest of his fellow man. That was the thread he held onto. Not happiness, not comfort, not even love. Purpose. The belief that his suffering might still mean something, if he could survive long enough to make it so. He pulled himself back from the edge, but he did not simply recover. He began, deliberately, to reconstruct. After his single term in Congress ended in 1849, Lincoln returned to Springfield and threw himself into his law practice. But something else was happening in the margins. He began carrying books with him on the circuit, not law books, Euclid's Elements, the Bible, Shakespeare, Burns. While other lawyers drank whiskey and played cards after court sessions, Lincoln would fetch a candle and read late into the night. His law partner, Herndon, marveled at his ability to concentrate while everyone else snored around him. Lincoln later wrote that during these years he had studied and nearly mastered the 6 books of Euclid: geometry, pure logic, propositions that must be proven step by step with no appeals to emotion. He was teaching himself to think, not as a politician who argues to win, but as a logician who argues to find truth. One night in Clinton, Illinois, a proof suddenly became clear to him. He grew so excited that he grabbed a nearby hostler and explained the entire demonstration to the bewildered man. This was not a hobby. This was therapy. He was rebuilding the architecture of his own mind. Lincoln used Euclid the way some men use prayer, as a tool to quiet the noise and impose order on chaos. He understood that the mind, left unattended, will spiral, that clarity requires practice, that the voice inside your head can either destroy you or direct you, depending on how deliberately you train it. If that kind of internal discipline appeals to you, there's an app called affirmations.app that offers a structured way to practice it daily. Link in the description. Now watch what happened when Lincoln finally emerged from those 5 years of silence. Lincoln's melancholy never left him. His face, in repose, was so overspread with sadness that observers compared him to Shakespeare's melancholy Jacques. But he developed a weapon against it. He became, by all accounts, one of the funniest men anyone had ever met. Friends said his storytelling was necessary to his very existence. When other men turned to whiskey or cards to escape their demons, Lincoln turned to laughter. He once explained it simply: he laughed so he did not weep. His humor was not escapism, it was strategy, a way to metabolize pain without being consumed by it. Modern psychiatrists call humor probably the most mature and healthy means of adapting to melancholy. Lincoln discovered this a century before they named it. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act ripped open the slavery debate. Lincoln, who had been drifting in political semi-retirement, suddenly found his voice again. But it was not the same voice. Before 1849, colleagues described him as a slasher-gaff politico, a man who reveled in sarcasm, who mocked his opponents with theatrical cruelty. The Lincoln who returned was different. He no longer attacked, he persuaded. He no longer performed, he reasoned. The crude partisan had become a statesman. The man who once ridiculed enemies now said that a drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. Something had been forged in those quiet years, a discipline, a patience, a willingness to endure what could not be changed and to change what could. His friend Joseph Gillespie watched him at a political gathering and said there was some magnetic influence at work that was perfectly inexplicable, which brought him and the masses into a mysterious correspondence with each other. People could not name what Lincoln had, but they felt it. Lincoln never stopped being melancholy. He never escaped the darkness entirely, but he learned to carry it. He once told a visitor that melancholy was a misfortune, not a fault. And when asked how he managed to function under the crushing weight of the Civil War, he said something that explained everything. "I laugh because I must not cry. That is all. That is all."